Well, let's just revisit that statement from George Galloway from the Workers' Party of Britain. He said this as polls closed. Thank you to every voter who took the time to send a message to the political class today. More than ever, they are two cheeks of the same backside, and in just a few hours, they're set to get a good kicking. No matter how you voted today, thank you for doing so. I promise, if elected tonight, to be an MP for all Rochdalians, no matter who you voted for. Well, George Galloway certainly sounding confident, but we haven't got a single result yet, of course. I'll be joined up until 3 a.m. by my studio guests, the former Labour MP Stephen Pound and lifelong Conservative supporter Lady McAlpine. Now, Stephen, let's start with you, because as we were going through that statement, you noticed a phrase from George Galloway, of course, once a Labour MP, then a Respect MP in a by-election not unsimilar to this, now the Workers' Party of Britain. But you say this phrase, two cheeks of the same backside, is a perennial one.
It's almost on George Galloway Tribute Act now. He's trotting out the same ghastly tropes. He's still treating the Palestinian people with utter contempt by using their bones to build a pulpit for himself to spew this divisive rubbish that he always does. But I was on television with him years ago, and the first thing he said, Blair and Brown, he says they're two cheeks of the same up. You know, he used a slightly different word, not backside. He used that against me and somebody else. He just uses it over and over again. There's not an original thought. And for me, I have to say, the thing that breaks my heart about this, last Friday week, I was in a church in Manchester at Tony Lloyd's funeral, at St Hugh of Lincoln Church. The place was packed. Tony was a good friend of mine, or Joe, we used to call him. Everybody called him that. We served in Northern Ireland together for a long, long time. And to see this ghastly imbroglio, these shenanigans, which actually make what happened last week in the House of Commons look fairly placid. What a horrific comment on Tony's record and his legacy, which has been destroyed and trampled on. So I think the point with George Galloway, it's the same old nonsense. We saw it in Bradford, we saw it in Glasgow, Kelvin. You know, we've seen it over and over again. And I have to say, I weep for the people of Rochdale, the Rochwellians, as he calls them, because with him there, it's going to be about George, and really and truly, in a place with some of the worst unemployment figures, the lowest education attainments, the highest number of street sleepers, do we really concentrate entirely on Gaza? Gaza doesn't have to exclude everything else, but it doesn't have to overcome everything else.
And Lady McAlpine, the Labour Party can to some extent be blamed for a lot of this mess. Normally, in normal times, this would be a walkover for them.
Absolutely. I just don't understand it. I really don't. I just don't understand how people can be so utterly stupid. I mean, OK, the Conservatives are being pretty stupid at the moment, but the Labour Party should be just grabbing every opportunity and turning it to advantage, and they're not.
And yet, we have also heard from the Conservatives in this by-election, it doesn't look like the Conservatives will do very well at all. There may be even a question mark over whether the Conservatives keep their deposit.
I know, that's really worrying. I hope they do. I really hope they do.
Why is it? Why is it that the Conservatives are almost not being considered in this conversation? It's all Lazzarelli, George Galloway, Simon Danczuk, even the independent David Tully, who was being spoken about by our political correspondent. The Tories are nowhere.
No, I think partly because it's generally deemed to not be a traditional Tory seat. But I still think, this government is just showing the country that there's no point in voting Conservative at the moment.
No, it's really not a good mark on either party, on either major party tonight, Stephen.
I wouldn't even try to argue with you there. Look, the Tory candidate went on holiday for a couple of weeks. The Green candidate has been thrown. His own party having nothing to do with him. He's been sort of disallowed. It's a very, very difficult one. But I think above all, the fact that an area with so many problems is now having to be in this crucible of hatred, and that does them no service. And above all, let's be honest, it does the people of Palestine no service at all.
Why is it that we have suddenly seen a crucible of a foreign war, a war that Britain is not party to, almost become the central question of this by-election?
Well, it's an incredibly good question. Why is it being fanned by people who are not necessarily British? Is it being fanned by the press? What's actually fanning the hatred? What is it that's forcing people to talk about it? Why are we talking about it now? I've never understood this, the way all of a sudden something fairly minor, okay, this is not minor, but at the same time, it's not a local problem, and it suddenly blows up out of all proportion. And, 6 months later, it'll be dead as dodo. Slightly different in this case.
Well, let's think about other cases like this. We had nothing like this over Iraq. We had one big march.
Exactly.
In March 2015. You had
George Galloway might argue that in many ways his Bradford by-election win in the middle of the coalition years
absolutely
could have been attributed to Iraq.
Well, that's one that I think we need to tease out at some length. But I mean, certainly he poured petrol on the flames without any shadow of a doubt. But when you think of the Uyghurs, that is genocide that's happening in that part of the world. The Chinese are committing absolute genocide there. We don't see marches there. In the whole of the Syrian war, with President Assad being propped up by Iran, barrel bombing his own people, millions of people killed. There was no marches on the street. In Kosovo, in Pristina, in South Balkans, we didn't see the same thing.
So
is it because it's Zion and is it the Jews? Is it? I don't know. All I know is that there's something pretty fundamental in the British psyche at the present time. And I think for some people, for the best reasons, Tom, they feel they've got to do something. And instead of doing what I'm doing and what a lot of other people are doing, raising money for medical aid for Palestine, helping to actually get some food and some humanitarian supplies in there, they think that marching and shouting, and above all, it's easier to find a scapegoat than it is to find a solution.
But Stephen Pound, George Galloway tonight says that he has won by a significant margin. That's his assessment. What do you make of that?
Well, if you look at the postal votes started being opened at 10 o'clock, and by 11 o'clock we had a pretty good idea. The postal votes were overwhelmingly in favour of George Galloway, partly because of some of the mosques had tended to vote together, but we don't know. But if you actually look at the postal votes, which aren't after all a determinant, but they're certainly an indication, he's done very well indeed. If he does get elected, and I have to say,
I have to say, Stephen, that GB News sources are now saying that it does look like George Galloway may well have won this by-election.
Well, you're ahead of the game. You're ahead of the curve, not for the first time.
I think it's horrifying.
Depressingly.
Lady McAlpine, your comments?
Sorry?
You think it's horrifying?
Well, it's depressing anyway. But, I don't know. There's just nothing normal going on at the moment. And, why are we making so much fuss? Because we're impotent, because we can't do anything, we can't interfere in this mess, the war.
If George Galloway gets into Parliament, let's face it, we've got the May recess, the Whitsun recess, the summer recess, and then a general election on November the 14th. It's a fairly good bet.
George Galloway's own campaign literature in this by-election has been saying, you can elect me for 200 days, and then there's the next election. To some extent, is that a fundamental point here, that it's almost a free hit to the establishment if the people of Rochdale decide to send Galloway to Parliament?
It's really funny, and it's a credit to you, that no one else has actually said that, and I think it's a very, very true factor. Look, George Galloway made, I think, probably one of the best speeches I've ever heard in the House of Commons when he was speaking against abortion, and he's speaking from a very Catholic perspective on that. And he, regardless of your own views on abortion, it was an incredible speech, it actually captivated the House. He's capable of doing this extraordinary speech, but on the other hand, so are other demagogues in history. They have that skill and that ability. All we can say is the one saving grace is if he has one, and the indications are not good for democracy, they're good for Galloway. The indications are that he will only be an MP for a short time, and he will be a pariah in the House.
Lady McAlpine, what do you think the House of Commons will feel like, will look like, if a triumphant George Galloway comes in, not for the first time with an independent party, defeating all the established parties and coming in as he did, a decade ago, but doing it for a second time? That's a political feat.
It is, but I have a nasty feeling that it won't be made much of when he goes in. You know better than I do. My gut feeling is that most people would not want to give him the pleasure of making a big scene about it.
Will it raise questions for the Labour Party in George Galloway's literature, in letters that he's sent?
It's got to.
In letters he's sent to potential constituents, to people he's asking the vote of, he says this could dislodge Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party. What do you make of that claim?
Does he want to take over? I mean,
would they want him to?
No, but one assumes that's what he's talking about. I mean, anybody who comes, people who come to me and said, I want to be leader of the Conservative Party, and I said, well, why? And what do you think you've got to offer? I think it's just an amazing arrogance, but I once accused David Cameron of being arrogant, and somebody said, you have to be arrogant to want to be Prime Minister.
Yeah, yeah.
Galloway had tried this before, if you remember. When he won the Bethnal Green by, or, in the Tower Hamlets,
yes,
he actually had a party called Respect.
Yes.
And that was a political party. This is the Workers' Party, is basically the George Galloway fan club.
Yeah, because Respect had councils, they had an infrastructure. This is just Galloway alone.
And they stood in a lot of constituencies. And interestingly enough, there's somebody who is very much of George Galloway's way of thinking is thinking of standing against Rushanara Ali in Bethnal Green and Bow. So I think George Galloway would rather have stood there, to be perfectly honest. But
well, one of the remarkable facts about Rochdale as a place is that it has a smaller proportion of Muslim voters than Bradford, for example, did. Bradford West, when George Galloway won that seat in the mid-coalition years, that was around 50% of the electorate was of Muslim faith. It's half that in Rochdale. Does that perhaps make this more of a political feat if he's managed to achieve this tonight?
Well, if he does it for two reasons. One is that all the Muslim vote in Rochdale does not belong to the same strand of Islam. And there's very, very different. There's 5 different mosques there, and it certainly looks as though all of them appear to be weeding out the vote for him. So if he does do it, it will be a dramatic result, come what may, and I don't think we can take that away. However, it will be a tragic result just as much as it's an epic one.